Hello, innovators. I'm Dustin Miller, PolyInnovator. Today, we're talking with Mark-Schaefer, a globally recognized marketing author, consultant, and accomplished keynote speaker, and executive director of Schaefer Marketing Solutions. Thank you for joining me on the Polymath podcast.
Well, I've been looking forward to this, Dustin.
Me too. We were talking beforehand too about having so many questions on there. Like, I've never had 30 questions before like that. So that's awesome. New experience. Hello and welcome to the Polymath Polycast. So this is a show about innovators and becoming a poly-innovator. So one thing I like to do to kind of start off is to have you share something about yourself that no one knows about you.
Something about myself that no one knows about me. Oh, well, I mean, one of the things that I guess I haven't talked about really is when I was a kid, I was an actor.
Oh.
And I was, my mother was in local theater productions, and she would drag me along. And so they would give me bit parts in the theater productions, and that led to, an interest in theater. And I had bigger roles when I was in high school and even in college. Some people thought I was going to be a professional actor someday, but it was a hobby that I enjoyed.
Yeah, I'm sure it probably led into a bit more of comfort on stage too, which might have helped with your keynotes.
Curiously, it really didn't. When I started speaking, I was really terrified, and had a lot of anxiety, and then I kept getting invited to bigger and bigger things. And I'll never forget, I was just in front of a crowd. I was ready to go on stage in front of about 300 or 400 people at a big event in Cincinnati. It was really my first big event, and I remember just pacing up and down the hall being terrified, and then just trying to get in this mindset of, well, look, this is your job now. Why would you be afraid of going to work?
Right.
And then I just got more confidence over time, and now I'm very comfortable on stage, and even sort of playful.
Mm-hmm. You kind of have your more naturalistic personality exposing on there. So it also kind of reminds me of just being on stage visually on this as well, with the whole podcasts or on camera, that kind of thing. A lot of people have that nervousness on camera, and even just before this meeting or before other meetings, I get a little nervous at first because I don't do the pre-show conversations like a lot of podcasters do, and so this is our first time seeing face to face and kind of getting a feel for each other. So they just kind of nerve-wracking in a way, but it's still exciting at the same time.
Yeah, it's always fun.
So going into the questions here, you have a saying that the most human company wins. How can we shift to that more anthropocentric approach then?
Well, I think today the problem with many businesses is they're too obsessed with technology. And technology it's not because technology is bad. It's because technology is good. It's so much fun.
Yeah.
And it's so intoxicating and so cheap. But we've lost our way. And marketing has always been around human connections and human emotions. And so what we need to do is look to find ways to use technology to lower barriers between people, not raise barriers between people. And I think a technology like this, like we're using today, I mean, we're seeing each other for the first time. We can hear our voices, we can see our faces, we can hear, our passions.
Yeah.
And that's a great use of technology. And so what we need to do is really look carefully at what we're doing in our companies. And if there's anything we're doing that our customers hate, like spam, like taking advantage of them through robocalls, or piling them up with direct mail, then we need to stop that.
Right.
And we need to sort of just regroup and think about how we would like to be marketed as customers and consumers, and move toward that sort of style of marketing.
Definitely. And I think this was in your book, Marketing Rebellion. There's a story about how you signed up for a lead magnet with Salesforce. And just from that one thing, they asked for your phone number and all that stuff. And they called you, they emailed you 10,000 times, all that kind of stuff.
I mean, it was harassment.
Yeah, exactly.
It really is. And I think that's what we've lost sight of, is that just because we go to someone's website, or even if we download some white paper, that doesn't mean we want to be a lead. It doesn't mean that we want to be called. And people, I think companies today, too often are just really abusing people.
Yeah. So pivoting a little bit here, I've always been a fan of Microsoft's products, but I wanted to ask you, why is Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella a hero of yours?
I really love what he's doing at Microsoft, and I think everything about a company starts with the culture.
Mm-hmm.
That's what comes through in their marketing, in their advertising, in their sales, in their customer service. And the company culture can only start at the top. There's no such thing as a grassroots change in company culture. And if you look at, Microsoft has only had 3 CEOs,
right?
And so all of those men have had dramatic impacts on the culture of that company. And I think what Satya has brought is sort of definitely a gentleness and a humanity that comes from his upbringing that is definitely showing through in Microsoft. I think Microsoft is coming through as a much more human, customer-centric company in everything they do, much more tuned in, and that's definitely coming from his leadership. So, I love it. I think Microsoft has become cool again, in a large part because of his leadership.
That's good. I love how that impacts you in a way. So one thing I also kind of was curious about, I like looking into people's background and online presence. And so one of your first YouTube video actually, at least that is listed. I've seen
That's
that people.
scary. It's scary.
It's scary.
First YouTube. It would be scary to me if you looked at my first of anything. But go ahead.
Yeah. I'm gonna call you out on it too. The first video.
Call me out on it, man. Call me out on it. I don't even know what it was.
So it's actually about why you blog. And so that was about 10 years ago, and you're still kind of getting the first mover advantage on that platform video format. So why were people trying to convince you to vlog about blogging or just vlog for that first time? What were your motivations?
My motivation to blog was really purely academic at the time. I had moved from working from a big company and started my own consulting firm. I was also teaching, and back then social media was just really starting to go mainstream. And I realized that for me to teach about it or to even think about social media in the context of marketing, I had to do it. I had to immerse myself in it. And so the first experiment really was the blog, and didn't know what I was doing, and wasn't very good at it, but stuck with it, with it. And today, I love it. It's my favorite thing to do. But it was just really a grand experiment to see what it was about, to learn how to do it.
Well, and I think part of the question there was also about why you started the YouTube video channel as well, because you're talking about the social media and how it's evolving. How long was it after you started your blog that you did your first video?
Well, I'm just going to be completely honest with you that I don't remember. And here's why. There's a good reason for that. YouTube has not been important to me, and so I'm not saying it's not important. I'm not saying that video isn't important, but as a small business person, as an entrepreneur, you only have so much time. And this is a mistake that a lot of people make. They try to do everything and they try to be everywhere. And so I strongly believe that you need to focus, that you need to pick one thing, master that, build your audience, and pick something that you love. Pick something that's going to bring you joy. And so I started the blog about maybe 11 or 12 years ago. And then my next major channel was a podcast. And that was, I think, 6 or 7 years after I started my blog. And actually, it was 5. It was 5 years after I started my blog. And that's a long time. But I didn't want to do anything. I didn't want to engage in any new activity that would jeopardize the quality of my blog. So it was a very careful decision, a very systematic decision. And video for me has always been on the sidelines. I spent a lot of time doing a good job on my blog and doing a good job on my podcast. I'd like to do more video if I could find a way to do it very, very well and very, very efficiently. But it just hasn't been my main thing.
Yeah, I totally get it. And we're doing video right now, so that's pretty easy. It's interesting too how similar we are, because I started my blog around 2011, my first blog at least, and I didn't keep it consistent throughout that time. I started to back up in 2016, 2017 or so, but I didn't do my first podcast until about 5 or 6 later, like you. And then I actually was very afraid of YouTube or doing videos because of the being on camera part. But I started YouTube after that too. I focused on one and did the other. And it's interesting how you and we start with the blog first, whereas a lot of people start with the video first. Where is your take on that?
Well, I think, a lot of the emphasis, first of all, when I started my blog in 2009, video really wasn't much of an option back then. I mean, in 2009, you still needed equipment. You needed, editing.
Yeah.
I mean, you couldn't do it on a smartphone, right? I mean, today you can make a video instantaneously and upload it. I mean, back in 2009, you didn't have the bandwidth.
Yeah, true.
Right? I mean, it would take you forever to try to upload a video or something, right? So, I mean, part of it was my place in time. The first thing to do was blogging. Blogging was the first content that people were creating because it was easy.
Right.
Technologically, it was easy. It was a word, right? And then video came along. And now podcasting is coming along, right? So a lot of the emphasis right now is on video. Blogging is sort of seen as old-fashioned, I think, in some ways. But there will always be a place for blogging and the word. As long as people read, there'll be a place for blogging. And I think the other technologies are just sort of catching up to unmet human needs. I mean,
Right.
People love video. They love podcasting. Eventually, we'll have a channel where we'll be creating like virtual reality experiences, right? That's going to be the next thing. I'm surprised it hasn't happened already, to be honest with you. But again, part of it is the technology. Part of it is the bandwidth. Part of it is we sort of need a home room for that kind of thing. What's the YouTube for virtual reality? We don't have one yet, right? So it'll come together, and that'll sort of be the next thing. And then that'll be the cool thing. And everybody will say, Mark, why don't you have a virtual reality channel?
Yeah.
And I'll say, maybe I'll get there eventually.
Yeah. Well, and I love how you thought about it though. And I was actually hesitant to ask you, like, what do you think the future one would be? And you already answered it for me. So that's awesome. And I definitely, that hit me kind of hard, that like, what would be the YouTube for VR? And I'm really curious to see how that's going to evolve.
Well, I think that's one of the major obstacles right now is if we want, let's say, if you want to go home and enjoy a movie, then you flip through, Netflix, right? If you want to go and enjoy a VR, where do you go? We need a Netflix for VR.
Mm-hmm. So it's kind of going off on the whole Netflix idea. People have been watching a lot of shows like that. They've been listening to more podcasts because we've all been at home during this time of recording. We're still kind of in this weird pandemic state. We're in this kind of state at home all the time. And it's interesting how you've been talking about on the various shows, and even I've been on with other guests on the podcast. Some people are going to need to be woken up, as you say, out of their pandemic bubbles. What do you mean by that in the sense of how they should be woken up?
Well, it's funny that, even you started out with saying everybody's at home and they're consuming more content, but they're really not. And I think that's been a surprise. So, for example, for many people, podcast downloads during the pandemic have been down 40 or 50%.
Right.
People reading articles on the blogs, for example, have been down. Netflix is up, of course. But the reason is because people's routines are broken.
Yeah.
So they used to listen to podcasts on their commute to work, and now there is no commute to work. Mm-hmm. And so we're going through an unprecedented and dramatic time where consumer behaviors are going to change forever.
Mhm.
Now, some of those behaviors are going to transcend the pandemic. I think people are going to have an entirely different relationship with food coming out of the pandemic. They're going to have a very different way of relating to people. I think there's going to be new concerns about health and safety
Mhm.
that are going to completely change forever. I'm really concerned about what's going to happen to the hospitality industry and hotels and airlines. That industry is going to be transformed forever.
Yeah.
But then there are going to be behaviors that will come back, but people are going to kind of forget that it's safe to do that now.
Mhm.
So, and I think the travel industry is a perfect example. I mean, when things finally get back to normal, some marketing is going to have to be spent on, hey, it's okay,
Yeah.
we're still here, you can go on a plane now. So that's what I meant by, we'll have to go through a period where in some industries where people have to be woken up.
Right. Well, the pandemic brought it on such a change so drastically. Like, we had to flip a switch real quickly. Whereas you're kind of saying that it's going to be almost too slow, so people aren't going to realize that they need to be woken up. And like Hertz, for example, the car rental place is like getting bankrupt or something like that. I heard something along the lines of just not having enough money and whatnot.
Right. Well, I mean, nobody's renting cars.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and what do you pivot to when you've got all these cars that you've bought for people to rent? So we're going to see a lot of that. It's just the outfall is just beginning.
Right. Well, and people get into a state of panic much more quickly and are more reactive. And so, how do you think that people can keep their composure?
Well, look, everybody is suffering in some way and experiencing some level of anxiety and perhaps even panic. So I mean, the first thing we need to do is really acknowledge that it's okay. Um, I saw really disturbing things on the web, especially early on, where it said, don't buy into the fear, don't be a victim. It's not okay to be fearful right now. Well, it is okay to be fearful right now. It absolutely is,
Mhm.
because it's legitimate. Everyone has lost something significant. Maybe it's just the loss of the ability to go to a baseball game, or to go to your favorite pub, or go to an outdoor a concert.
Or a job.
Maybe you've lost your lifestyle because you're working from home with two kids crawling over you, and you're trying to work at home school. So
Mhm.
everyone is losing something. And so I think we have to acknowledge that this is a radical time,
Mhm.
and the fear is legitimate, and it's okay to fear that, to feel that. We also need to acknowledge that it's in others, and that
Yeah.
emotions are really hyped up right now and amped up. And so we need to be extra patient. We need to extend grace to people, even when we don't understand, because everybody is really, just whacked out right now.
Yeah.
And then finally, I think what helps me is to really focus on what's in our control today. What's one positive thing we can do today to, to heal ourselves, to, heal our families, to heal our businesses. If we spend too much time dwelling on what ifs
Mhm.
and what could happen down the road, we'll absolutely go crazy,
Yeah.
because it's unknowable. It's just a mind game. When we've got to stay out of that. People, when you dwell on the worst case, well, the worst case almost never happens.
Yeah.
The best case almost never happens. But there is going to be something, in between, and that's unknowable. But we just need to concentrate on what is a small step we can take today, a positive thing we can take today. And I find that really relieves a lot of the irrational worry that goes into the panic that could occur if you think about the future all the time.
I love it. And it's very stoic from what you said there, where you focus on what you can control and not what you can't control. And by doing so, you could be more proactive. And that's more of a personal thing, like how you can personally go about it, which I think is super important. So thank you for sharing that. How do you think companies and brands then can be proactive themselves? Because they have to do that personally as a company because there are people in that company, obviously. But how do they portray themselves in a proactive manner and actually act in a proactive manner?
Well, I've written up some of my thoughts on that in this little ebook that I'm giving away for free called the Pandemic Business Playbook, and it's you can find it right on the front page of my website at Businesses Grow. And I think what businesses need to do to be proactive in this weird time, the most important thing is to focus on the probabilities of what's going to be happening with our customers.
Mm,
Okay. And we can start collecting a lot of information about that. And what we're seeing is that consumers are shifting in these really radical ways right now. And if you think you know your audience, if you think you know your customers, you probably don't right now.
mhm.
And so we need to tune back in. We need to listen. We need to think about what's going on in this pandemic. Do they still have the money to spend with us that they
Yeah.
used to? Are they buying, our goods and services through different channels? Are there new competitors who are emerging? Have some of our old competitors moved away? I mean, you mentioned Hertz, right?
Yeah.
There's going to be a shakeout. So we have to look at everything that's changing, 360-degree view of the consumers, and then start to think about, do we still have the skills and competencies out there to meet those needs? Are we still going to be able to connect with them in the same ways that we used to? I mean, I used to get a lot of my business from speaking at big conferences. We're not going to have big
Yeah.
conferences for at least another year.
Right.
And so I've got to think about, we had a little bit of fun before we went on the air here because I was
Yeah.
having technical issues.
Right.
The reason I'm having technical issues is I'm upgrading my equipment so I can do a better job with online,
Events and whatnot. Yeah.
events. So those are some of the things that companies can think through to be proactive.
Definitely. And it's interesting that you mentioned that. We'll have to go back to that expo thing, but kind of going off the pandemic business playbook, you talk about asking yourself as a business, is my business relevant to that particular time right now? And you were mentioning how basic human needs are what people are focusing on for a lot of the time. Like, I lost my job during the quarantine. I mean, I got it back afterwards once we opened back up, but I had no work for many weeks there. And so obviously bills are much more concerned to me than go buying a particular fun item or commodity. And so it's come down to, why is it not only important, but how can we do that reflection as businesses and brands to be more proactive of that, like, intense mindset that people are in?
No, we're seeing that, and one of the things that's been so interesting is, you started the interview asking me about, the most human company wins, and my book, The Marketing Rebellion, and a lot of people have said, Mark, we're watching your book come true,
Mhm.
because what I projected in the book is that, you know, is that the traditional way that companies have connected with customers through advertising doesn't really work anymore. People don't see ads like they used to. They don't trust ads like they used to, and they need to connect with people in a more human and authentic way. They need to show up. Now, that's exactly what's happening. The companies that are just simply taking out ads like they used to, and they're saying, oh, we're with you,
Mhm.
we'll be here. They've become laughable.
Yeah.
They've become memes, right? And the companies that are rolling up their sleeves and they're making masks, they're
Mm.
making ventilators, they're feeding hospital workers, they're getting
Yes.
down in the community and helping the people who are unemployed. Those are the companies we'll remember.
Right.
Great branding is creating an emotional connection between your consumers and what you do. And right now, the way to do that is to become legendary, right?
Mm.
Is to do something bold and do something meaningful that people are going to remember at the end of this pandemic.
Well, and being adaptable as well is a big thing
Yeah,
I wanted to kind of
absolutely.
add to that. And I think that too, You mentioned something about how companies are changing what they're doing. One example comes up, I think it was a pizza place in New York or something like that. They made all their money by pizza by the slice. So they looked at what kind of plastic they could melt in their oven, and they switched over to making masks for, not masks, but shields for
Yeah.
the pandemic. And so they were able to not only survive, but by the end of this, they'll have two businesses if they wanted to at the end.
Yeah. 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 And in a small way, I mean, I had to pivot my business. I mean,
Mhm.
like you, I lost all my work.
Yeah.
I lost all my work in a period of about 3 days.
Oh, man.
And so I went through a period of disorientation.
Yeah.
And then, just like any company, I had to think about, okay, what are my skills and how do I apply that now?
Mhm.
And what I realized at the heart of everything I do, I'm a teacher. And I realized that I just need to teach something new right now because people are in a different place. So I pivoted all the content on my blog, and it's worked. People have loved it. People have shared it. And actually, the traffic on my blog during the pandemic doubled. That I didn't predict that. I could have never imagined that.
Right.
But it showed that I was rewarded by responding to people where they are now.
Yeah. And you're paying attention a lot more. And kind of going back to that whole expo thing, you're saying how your business has suffered. You had to change your entire overall expectancy of it. Considering that events like South by Southwest had to cancel their events because of the pandemic, and things are going to be changing over the next decade or so. Another example actually is E3, a gaming expo that completely used to be like the main source when it came to video games. It had already lost a lot of its kind of main companies like Microsoft and Sony, that kind of thing over the years anyway. So now they have no expo at all. And so, including yours too, you actually had your uprising retreats had to be canceled too. So how do you think these events are going to respond next year or down the line?
That's a really good question because some things can be replicated and some things can't.
Mm.
My uprising event was a marketing retreat. It was a treat for 30 leaders. We'd go, to this forest lodge and talk about, big thoughts and big ideas. You would love it.
Definitely.
Someone who loves big ideas.
Yes.
And we're in this beautiful setting, and we would hike in the woods, and we'd have great food. You can't replicate that online.
Yeah.
No way. You can't even try. Right now, something like video games, where you're demonstrating new games and new equipment and new technology, I mean, that's something you could probably transfer online. The biggest obstacle right now is that when I go to a live event like South by Southwest, I'll start at 8 in the morning.
Hmm.
I'll have breakfast with somebody. I'll go all day long.
Yeah.
I'll go till 10 o'clock, right? I mean, that's late for me.
Right. So
Uh,
early for me.
that's all day long for
Yeah.
me. Um, and but you can't do that on a computer.
Hmm.
People can only take digestible chunks of an hour or maybe 2 hours at the most to connect in a virtual way. So that wipes out a lot of possibilities.
Hmm.
It wipes out a lot of content. If you think
Definitely.
about South by Southwest, it was not unusual in 1 hour to have 50 concurrent sessions.
Hmm.
Well, now you can't have 50 concurrent sessions. You need to have one. South by Southwest, they're trying to have, one or two presentations a day. I'm not even really sure what they're trying to do
Yeah.
because you can't replicate the coolness
Yeah.
and the
And the
connections
networking and whatnot.
and the electricity
Yeah.
of South by Southwest. I hope they survive because we need events like that.
There was one event, I can't remember the name, that I saw that they were trying to do some concurrent events and whatnot going on. And you were right too when it comes to all these different changes like that. And one thing I actually kind of skipped over that I kind of want to go into now is the fact that like personal things, like not just events, but you and I, for example, had to learn new skills. And I learned how to cut my hair on my own. I bought clippers at the beginning of the pandemic because I knew I wasn't going to be able to get a haircut. You and your wife started doing those, what is it called? Ticket home meals. What was the name of it? Fresh Eats or something like that.
HelloFresh.
HelloFresh. There we go. Started having those. I almost had the idea of like for your retreat, maybe you could order a whole bunch of HelloFresh meals for all 30 people on there and have them all eat at the same time with you or something like
Oh,
that.
that'd
But
be funny.
yeah.
Yeah.
How did that kind of adaptation for you happen? And what do you might think that like, since you and your life loved that so much from what I read, you guys are going to keep doing it after the pandemic and whatnot?
Well, I use that as an example of how consumer behaviors are going to change in really unpredictable ways.
Mhm.
My wife and I, we had the virus.
Yeah.
My wife got sick, and she was sick for almost 3 weeks. Then I got sick, and I was sick for about 3 weeks. So for 6 or 7 weeks, we had the virus in our house, and we went through this period of quarantine. We couldn't leave the house,
Yeah.
and nobody wanted to come around us, and we couldn't get food. And so we subscribed to this HelloFresh. So you get this box delivered to your door, and you have ingredients in there, and you can learn how to make new recipes. And it's pretty cost effective, and it's simple. And we decided that we liked it.
Mhm.
So the profound idea here is that we're buying our food, through a channel we
Mhm.
didn't even know existed before the pandemic.
Right.
And now, that's something that we're going to continue to use throughout, now that the pandemic's over. Well, no, it's not that. No,
Yeah.
not the
I'll
pandemic.
cut that out.
Now that our sickness is over, right?
Right.
So we're continuing to use it. And so I think there's going to be a lot of things like that. That's an example of a new competitor in the food business, a new channel in the food business, a new consumer behavior. There are going to be millions of examples like that.
Yeah.
That we'll have to be aware of.
I mean, even Zoom's a good example. I used Zoom for mentor meetings for my school last year, but that was about it. Now I'm using it on a weekly basis, multiple times a week, interviewing people like yourself. And so it's interesting how some companies are experiencing hypergrowth. Would you say that HelloFresh did anything to inspire loyalty to you, or was just there?
Well, it served a need.
Uh-huh.
I mean, one of the things I've been talking about is that today, people are at what I say at the bottom of the pyramid, right? We learned this in Psych 101, Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Mm-hmm.
And at the bottom of the hierarchy, before you can worry about buying a cool sweater that you love, you need to have food, you need to have air, you need to be able to breathe, you need to have a roof over your head. You don't want to be alone.
Yeah.
You don't want to be isolated. And that's where many people are today. So, people who were ready to buy a new car or a new boat or a new sweater, now they're at the bottom of the pyramid.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to reflect on this in terms of where are you serving customers right now? HelloFresh is serving people at the bottom of the pyramid.
Right.
They're providing food delivered right to the home, and people need that right now. Okay. Now, Hertz, we mentioned Hertz earlier. It's a rental car company. That is an aspirational goal.
Right.
Vacations and travel just aren't going to be happening for a while. And so you've got to find a way to become relevant at the bottom of the pyramid right now, or you're gonna go out of business.
Well, in Marketing Rebellion, there was a chart I really liked of that pyramid where if you're a business approaching the top of the chart, the two couple lines up there, you said you need to pivot. And then the last couple lines, you said that double down in a way. And I thought that was really important to kind of note as well.
Right. Yeah. I mean, a lot of people are struggling saying, do I spend money on marketing right now? Do I spend money on advertising right now? Well, if you're selling luxury boats, probably not.
Yeah.
If you're HelloFresh, you borrow as much money as you can to market and advertise like crazy.
Right.
And they are.
Yeah, definitely. So all in all, pandemic playbook, there's also talking about the hierarchy of needs that we've talked about as well. And it also comes down to the bell curve and where people are at on there, how much are they willing to adopt new ideas, that kind of thing. And since they're so focused on basic needs, they're going to be more on the skeptical side, on the other side of the bell curve. How can we stay ahead on the bell curve when disaster strikes? I guess as a consumer in a way.
I'm not really sure how to answer the question, because I did have a talk about a bell curve in the pandemic playbook, but it was more really connected to expectations and probabilities of what's going to happen next. The problem that I see is that many companies are paralyzed and unable to really move forward because they're just dreaming of the worst case scenarios and planning for the worst case scenarios, and that's where all their energy is. And so I'll give you an example of how I'm trying to plan for the probable scenario. Okay, a great deal of my income, over the years, has come from being a professional speaker. I'm a keynote speaker. I go all over the world. Now, for me to start thinking about the future and planning about the future, I need some information. I need to know, when is it probable that these events and conferences are going to come back? You know what? There's nothing out there. There's no research at all. So I did my own research. I did a SurveyMonkey survey. I went out to people who aren't in the event industry, but people who attend events. And I asked them, when do you think small events will come back? Less than 100 people. When are large events going to come back? Most people thought the small events are going to come back maybe the end of this year, early next year. Most people thought big events aren't going to come back till maybe the second half of next year or even 2022. Right. Okay. Is that a scientifically done study? No, but it's the best I have right now. I can now have, here's the probability. Big events aren't going to come back till the second half of 2021 or maybe 2022. That's how I need to plan my business right now. Am I going to be able to make up that income through online events? No. Yeah. It's just not happening. There's a different expectation. People are starting to pivot. We already talked about, South by Southwest would have, hundreds of speakers. Now they can just have a few. So it's the same in my world. You can't have concurrent sessions. You've got to really select your speakers more carefully. The revenue is going to be lower. So that's an example of thinking about what's the probability and then fight to the other side based on something that's rational.
Definitely. And I love how you did a SurveyMonkey questions as well. It's a very way to take charge and take action about that. And so that kind of leads me to my next question too. One last quote from the pandemic playbook is that the most influential and important events are the ones that emerge spontaneously and with little warning, just like this pandemic. And so because of that, like the coronavirus itself, we have millions of those events ahead of us. How can we be proactive like you were when that event strikes, or at least soon after? Because it took you a hot minute before you were able to really do that, I feel like. But how can we be sooner on that, and so we can get ahead of that data?
Well, I think the opportunity for really anyone now is to really pay attention to the gaps, to the disconnects. Okay, so in every problem, every crisis, there's an opportunity, right? Because there's a new need. And so my prediction is, in the next 6 months, we're going to have more startups than at any time in the history of business, because there's a lot of gaps right now. There's a lot of needs. Okay, think about some of the companies we talked about. Zoom, right? Filled a need, became a star. HelloFresh filled a need, became a star. I've been inspired. There was a young woman in Oregon, 17 years old, started a new business. She said, nobody can be buying from our local businesses. They're suffering. Consumers can't get out of their house. What she did was she started this $100, for $100, you subscribe to local businesses. She went around to 10 different businesses every week, collected a box with 10 cool things that she could take to her customers, supporting the local businesses, delighting people in their homes. 17 years old, created this new business, and making great money, right?
Right.
There's going to be a lot of that. We just have to look at what are the needs, what are the gaps, how do we fill that now, and that's where the opportunity is.
I love that. And there's two things I wanted to go off of that there. And it reminds me of how the 2008 recession and 2009, I guess, housing crash and whatnot caused companies like Uber and Airbnb to explode. And so one thing I've talked to a lot of my guests about is hypergrowth, what companies are going to experience the hypergrowth like Amazon and Zoom. And so, yeah, that really kind of makes it interesting in that regard.
It's any company right now, any company at the bottom of the pyramid. And what's happening is the pandemic, it sure is changing a lot, but it's also just accelerating things that would have happened anyway.
Right.
It's an amplifier. It's an accelerator. Someone wrote something recently that said, the pandemic is shooting us 10 years into the future. So if we sort of think about where we were going to go anyway, those are the companies that are going to have the hypergrowth.
Definitely. One of my guests recently even called it an accelerant, and I think that was a very good way of putting it as well. And so something that you reminded me of in the Pandemic Playbook is you said the innovators, creators, and makers will lead us to the other side. And this is actually one of the main reasons why I created PolyInnovator, the home brand of the Polycast, to bring together those kinds of people. How can we cultivate those creative minds and innovate towards the future?
Well, I think we're still sorting that out. Connecting and collaborating we're just figuring it out, because we can't go to our local coffee shops and brainstorm with people anymore, right? Certainly Zoom has helped, but it's just not the same as getting people together over pizza and beer with a whiteboard, right?
Right.
And I'm seeing breathtaking innovations occur because they're just going to find a way to have fun in different ways, to collaborate in different ways. So that's why I said, look, the government isn't going to pull us out of this. It's going to be the innovators.
Yeah.
It's going to be the creators, because if you can make a buck, they're going to figure out how to, help us.
Yeah.
And that's what led the recovery after World War II. Is what led the recovery after 9/11. There were dire economic projections after both of those disasters. There's dire economic projections now. Right. I'm a realist. I don't sugarcoat things. I try to look at things with data. There's going to be a shakeout. Some people aren't going to make it to the other side, but there's also going to be a lot of ingenuity that accountants and statisticians and economists can't account for that will get us through this thing.
You say you're a realist too, and it actually reminds me of something I was thinking about on the way home one day. I was thinking about this interview ahead of time, and I saw this business that was an expensive pizza place that was customizable. I don't remember what it was called, but I saw it had closed down because it had no more market to serve to, and they weren't able to innovate in any way. And I've always saw myself more as a stoic in business, where I was like, well, there's nothing we can do about it. There's no reason to get upset about it, that particular case. And I just thought, well, you should have innovated. And I don't know if that was just a negative or just whatever idea, but it's just interesting.
No, I mean, I have a tremendous amount of empathy about that, because, I'll give you an example that, many of the theaters and musical venues around me are in big, big trouble, right? And I heard recently that they're not able to book shows until the fourth quarter of 2021 at the earliest, right? Now, so you might say, oh, well, they need to pivot or they need to innovate. But on another level, I'm sad about that, because, and maybe I could be sad about your pizza place if I really loved that pizza and I really loved the family with their happy faces when I went into the place. And I'm sad that I'm not going to see baseball games, and I'm sad that I'm not going to go to, it's unimaginable. I'm not going to be able to go to these music venues, for a year or more.
Right.
And so there's certain things you can pivot, certain things that you can't. That's part of being a realist through this thing. You couldn't have planned for it.
Right.
You you just, in a lot of these cases, you just have to think, look, I couldn't have planned for this. It's not my fault. Okay, let's get over it and, reinvent yourself and pivot and find a way to fight to the other side.
Definitely. And one thing I will add is that the pizza place was a chain, so that's why I didn't feel bad as much. If it was a local place, I'd feel much more
Yeah.
worse about it. Me and my roommates tried to order from the local places as much as we could, like the local Chinese restaurant, for example, to try to keep them afloat.
The challenge that we all have
Mm.
is that there's never been anything like this.
Okay.
And so how could we have planned, how could we have had a hope that we could adapt quickly? You know, in my example, kind of in the back of my mind, I was prepared for a recession, right? You know, I had my money in certain places. In a recession, universities do particularly well because people go back to school or they stay in school longer. During a recession, people will still listen to podcasts, they'll still buy books. When the pandemic hit, even my university classes got canceled, right? The one thing I thought would always be there was canceled. My book sales collapsed, right? And so it took me, you know, a couple weeks really, and then I got sick.
Yeah, and then you got sick. It just hit you all at once there too.
So that basically said, you got to stop thinking about anything right now, and you just got to recover from this coronavirus. And but then I got out of it, and it was almost like waking up again. It was like waking up to a new world, to a new reality. You know, during my sickness, really, I was too sick to even really think about much or plan for anything. And so I kind of went through my own kind of waking up period, and sort of saying, okay, you know, I need to bring in money again. I need to figure out a way to pivot. And the one thing that really benefited me, and I'm very passionate about this, is that, you know, I've worked a long time to build my personal brand. And when I think about it, that's what saved me right now, is that I still have a reputation and I still have a presence where people turn to me. Even in hard times, people turn to me. And that is a sustainable competitive advantage that can never be replaced. And I think, you know, I want to encourage you. You had talked about, you had started a blog and then, you know, you kind of weren't consistent with it. Now you've started a podcast. But this is how you build a brand, by creating content consistently like this, creating an audience of people who care about you. And I've been doing this for a long time. And this is really where it's paid off right now. In a crisis, there were still people who relied on me, who depended on me, who turned to me, and that's going to help me survive. So one of the things I'm telling lots of businesses is, right now, if you have an opportunity to work on your personal brand and build your personal brand, we haven't talked much about my book, Known, but that's what that's about. This is the time to do it. It's not too late. It does take time. It does take dedication and work, but that is really one of the most important things that we can do right now to come out on the other side of this. Because like I said, there will be a shakeout. Yeah. And one advantage you can have is, are you known or are you not known? And if you're known, those are the people who are going to have the opportunities.
Definitely. And I'll have to have you on the show again, because I definitely want to talk about Known. In fact, a lot of the questions on here have been geared more towards Micro Valley and then the pandemic playbook. And so I really want to talk about Known the next time I have, because personal branding is super interesting as well. And it seems that we're both pivoting to this kind of hopeful mentality as well. One thing, before we start wrapping up and whatnot, that personal brand that I created, PolyInnovator, was in the essence of hope. I wanted to help make a change in the world. And during times like this, especially, I wanted to try to take advantage of it in a positive way to help people. And that's why I started having these interviews, because I think they're more helpful than what I was doing with the solo casts. And like you and I were both much more free because we're all stuck at home at this point. It was a perfect time to do it. And I was able to pivot to doing interviews just at the start of the pandemic. And the past month and a half, I've done over 20 different interviews on my show and 8 on other people's shows. And so it's been a beautiful experience. And so this brand, Polymath of Innovation, PolyInnovator, is about having that interdisciplinary skills for a personal brand specifically too. What do you think would be Polymath to you? Something I ask all my guests.
Yeah. A writer who I really like is Walter Isaacson, and he writes about geniuses. He wrote a book about Steve Jobs, about Benjamin Franklin. He wrote a book about Einstein. His latest book is about Leonardo da Vinci. And last year, I got to interview Walter Isaacson. I got to meet him
Really?
and interview him. And I asked him, what makes a genius?
Mm.
What are the traits that make a genius? And he said, it's really two things. He said, it's the ability to connect the dots. It's the ability to see patterns,
Mm.
right? And to connect the dots really in sort of an interdisciplinary way. And the second piece was to be endlessly curious. So, I'm not arrogant or bold enough to say that I'm a genius, but I am interested in lots of things.
Mhm.
I'm passionate about a lot of things. I love travel. I love art. I love history.
Yeah.
I love anything about, nature or biology or astronomy.
Yeah.
Uh, I love psychology. I love, journalism and literature and social media and business and marketing. I think having that breadth is important to deliver insights.
Mhm.
That's how you stand out in this world. Anybody can deliver information, but you can get information through a Google search.
Right.
You can get information on a blog post. What people really need is insights. And to deliver those insights, you have to have endless curiosity and be able to see patterns. And you have to be able to see patterns across different disciplines. So I think it's important to be curious about a lot of different things.
That's a perfect transition too. And going back to kind of the hero that we talked about earlier for you, the CEO of Microsoft, my hero was Leonardo da Vinci. So it's funny how
Yeah.
you brought him up too. Could bring it back to the other question. And I
Yeah.
saw that you listened to Walter Isaacson's book
Yeah.
on Instagram. I didn't know you actually had interviewed him. That's one detail I missed. I'll have to go into that interview. And so I listened to his Genius book first that you referenced there. What do you think are ways that we can cultivate Leonardo's curiosity then?
I actually have a blog post I've been working on that I never finished about that. At the end of Isaacson's excellent book, he talks about, I think he made a list of 32 ways we can be more like Leonardo da Vinci and to sort of look for patterns and to really just be curious about everything. But the lesson about Leonardo that had the biggest impact on me was the idea of collaboration. So his genius and his greatest works were collaborative, right? So there were lots of stories in the book where he was a great friend. He was a beloved man in his day. He had lots of friends, he had lots of parties, he had lots of discussions, and you could just see the sparks, building and building and building and building.
Yeah.
And even his biggest ideas, his best ideas, all started from somebody else. And that was something that I took to heart because, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a solopreneur. I spend too much time alone.
Mm.
And so when I wrote my latest book, Marketing Rebellion, I created what I called the Da Vinci team. And I went out and I had dinners and I had lunches and I bounced ideas off of different people to help make the book bigger and richer. And it absolutely did. There were 50 people who made that book better. And it's 100% better because I took a collaborative approach instead of trying to do everything myself.
Definitely. And that's why I wanted to have you on the show, because I could sense that polymathicness inside of you. I could see that you had all those various interests. And just even between your 3 degrees, which we didn't even get to touch on today, there was this dynamic interdisciplinary aspect behind it. And so I'll definitely link down the Pandemic Playbook and Marketing Rebellion in the section there for the links and whatnot later on. And I love how you were able to express that curiosity and the systematic thinking that you employ. And I would definitely say you're genius. Like you don't have to say it, you don't have to have the ego for it, but I would say it. And so,
well, I appreciate it. I'll just be gracious and I appreciate your kind words.
Well, and I want to thank you too again for coming on the show. Whenever I reached out to you, obviously you're a very busy person, and so I wanted to not like waste your time or anything like that. And I think that this conversation has been fruitful, and it's very interesting how we can take what we've talked about today and using that curiosity and collaboration we just spoke about and approaching it towards innovation for this new uncertain time. I think it very comes together full-heartedly.
Yeah, well, I've enjoyed it, and I want to just compliment you and thank you. You are the most prepared podcast host I've ever witnessed,
Thank you.
and the depth of your research and the insightfulness of your questions was spectacular. So good job, and keep it up. I want you to keep it up because you got to be consistent and don't give up to build your personal brand and arrive on the other side.
Thank you so much. And so where can people find you online?
Well, it's pretty easy. If you can remember Businesses Grow, you can find me. You can find my books that we talked about. My podcast is called The Marketing Companion, which just had its 7th birthday on the latest episode. And you can find lots of great information to help businesses of every size and all my social media connections. So I'd love to see people there.
Mhm. And I've reached out to you before, even just having interviews, just kind of talking to you, and you've always been very gracious and very nice, just in pure conversation there. So I think if anyone reaches out to you, they'll probably experience that same thing.
Well, I try. A lot of people comment. They said, "Oh my gosh, you're so nice and you're so accessible." And I'm thinking, what's the alternative? I mean, why?
Right.
Well, how come everybody else seems so mean?
Yeah. Or distant or whatnot.
Yeah. So, I mean, if people, reach out to me in an authentic way, I try my best. I try my best. Sometimes things might slip through the cracks, but I try to respond, and I try to help people because, I'm very fortunate to be in the position that I'm in, and I want to, set a good example for people.
Definitely. And you're a solopreneur, so you only have so much time. And so thank you for making the time for this today. One last thing before we go. What would be the call to action for the audience today after all we talked about?
Well, I think the call to action is something that I'm very passionate about in all of my writing and all of my talks, and I think is particularly relevant right now. And that is to be more human. To be more human in everything we do is to assess what are our interactions through email, through telephone, through text messages, through meetings, through Zoom, and just think about how can we help people in a more human and authentic way. How do we show our face, show our passion, let them hear your voice, be more human, because I truly do believe that the most human company will win. The most human podcast will win.
Definitely. All right. That's been great.